This woman made the news headlines last week thanks to her incredible discovery in her new garden. She bought a house and moved in, but unbeknownst to her, a huge war bunker was buried in the backyard. It was an enormous metal and concrete structure that had been buried for years. And curiously, that wasn't even the strangest thing they discovered. Because what they found inside the bunker was truly incredible. Woman discovers buried bunker in her backyard, then she sees why. Lindsay and Flint bought a new house and didn't know about the secret it held in the garden. But what was most surprising was that they found the secret door to the bunker right inside their house and not in the garden. They accidentally discovered it while they were busy with the major cleaning of their new home. But they didn't know exactly what they had found at that moment. While moving and viewing the house, the couple noticed the floor in the scullery sounded hollow, but the agent told them it was from the storage room beneath it. But during the cleaning, they found a metal hatch under the cupboard still standing there. Even though it gave Lindsay an eerie feeling and the hairs on her neck stood up, it intrigued her. What could it be? She asked Flint as they went to investigate. They soon realized the cupboard was used to hide the hatch, because the previous owners had taken all the other furniture with them. Everything except the cupboard and the carpet beneath it. The couple had found this weird, but now they found the reasoning behind it. Lindsay and Flint were intrigued and thought it was time to find out why the previous occupants had gone to so much trouble to keep this secret. Together, the couple was able to push the cupboard aside, unveiling the full metal flap, which turned out to be a manhole. Lindsay and Flint looked at each other, curious about what could be below it. Maybe it's a cellar, Lindsay said with a mix of hope and fear in her voice. She didn't like the thought of an unknown room beneath her house. But what they would find was totally different. The couple grabbed the manhole cover and carefully removed it. They stared into the hole, and the idea of it being a cellar or a sneaky wine stash quickly went out the window. The hole went some 30 meters deep into the ground. An old rusty ladder hung at the edge of the hole. Lindsay wasn't sure it would hold them, but the question gnawed at them. What was down there? Lindsay and her husband had both never seen anything like this before. The hole was so deep that they could not even see the bottom properly. This scared Lindsay, but to her husband, it did the opposite and piqued his interest. He kneeled down, put his head inside the hole, and yelled. They heard his voice echo for a long time. All right. Let's see what's down there, he said while getting ready. First, Flint sat down on the edge and carefully put his feet on the rusty ladder. The opening was tight, but he managed to fit through and descend, the ladder creaking under his weight. Lindsay was only watching, and her claustrophobia already kicked in. I'm staying here, she said with a quivering voice. Lindsay would be the eyes and ears above ground. In that way, she could help but not put herself in danger. Flint was breathing slowly and concentrating hard while descending the ladder. It was almost perfectly dark, so he moved primarily on touch. Then, a light beam appeared. See anything yet, baby? Is it a wine cellar or something else? Lindsay called out as she shone down with a flashlight. Thanks to the light, Flint could see that he was almost at the bottom. He moved a little faster, curious of what he would find. Flint jumped the last few steps, and his landing echoed through the dark space. He immediately realized he needed a flashlight to make progress and asked his wife for it. His eyes grew wide with surprise when he illuminated the space and saw a long tunnel. Where did it lead to? Maybe we should call for help, he suggested, and Lindsay agreed. She called her brother, who came immediately, intrigued by their story. Flint stayed in the tunnel while Lindsay and her brother, Carl, followed above ground. They kept in touch with old walkie-talkies, and as Flint moved through the tunnel, Lindsay and her brother eventually left the house and entered the garden. Then Flint could suddenly see the light in the distance. Was it an opening that would lead outside? Or was there a lamp hanging here that had been burning for years? As Flint thought it, he found evidence to substantiate his idea. He shone his flashlight up to the ceiling of the tunnel and could see a long yellow electricity cable running across it toward the light source. This was getting more interesting by the minute. He shared this exciting find with his wife and brother-in-law above, and they listened in amazement. They pictured his surroundings, unaware they would soon join him down there. Lindsay and Carl silently searched the ground for any sign of electricity cables, and then she heard it. Silent footsteps and Flint's muffled voice came through the soil. "I think I'm standing right above you," she called out, looking down at the ground. And then she saw it. A small piece of concrete sticking out on the turf before her feet. Was it part of the tunnel? Was it the exit? Lindsay kneeled and tried to grab it, but it was solid on the ground. "Come look at this," she shouted at her brother, who came running back. She started to dig, and Carl quickly followed. Flint could hear them scrape the soil away. "I can see some light," he yelled, and his voice wasn't as muffled as before. The siblings dug as fast as they could, eventually uncovering part of the tunnel. But that wasn't the only thing they uncovered, because a part of the tunnel ceiling had fallen apart, and they could see Flint standing there, half covered in darkness. "Good timing," he said, pointing at a big iron door. "I can't get it open on my own." The trio looked at each other. They came all this way, so they had to find a way to open it. Carl jumped down without hesitation. But Lindsay was still a bit scared. She sat on the edge of the hole for a while before eventually making the plunge, and they were finally all in the tunnel. Lindsay fell silent momentarily, looking in amazement at the long tube she just landed in. It was amazing, and she couldn't believe this was below her property. A million questions went through her mind. Then, a voice woke her from her thoughts. "Are you going to help us?" she heard her husband call out. "Oh yes, of course, I wandered off for a moment," she declared. They approached the door together in the tunnel, and the three of them pulled. It was enormously heavy. What could be hidden behind it? How could a giant tunnel have been under their house without them knowing it? They would soon find answers to those questions. The three of them pulled as hard as they could on the rusty handle of the door, and with a big creak, it slammed open. Behind it, a room was revealed. "What is this place?" Lindsay asked as they entered. They immediately saw that people had lived here. They saw magazines, personal items, and old food containers. But what caught their attention most were glass jars with a deteriorated content beyond recognition. The entire room was filled with them. Lying on the floor, on the table, and in cabinets. Lindsay went to take a closer look, and according to the labels, they were filled with whiskey and rum. But the thing that really caught her attention was the year these bottles were brewed, 1945. "These bottles are almost 80 years old," she exclaimed in amazement, realizing these bottles had seen war. Was this an old war bunker? They all shared the same thought and realized this was an incredible find. With a mix of excitement and caution, they ventured further. The bunker was immense. It went on and on. The number of rooms was incredible, and each one was filled with a new story. After going through a couple of rooms clearly meant as sleeping quarters, they entered a living area, and an old suitcase caught their attention. The trio was extremely curious and cautiously approached the metal case, wondering what secrets it would hold. Lindsay struggled to open it and saw it was locked with a padlock. "Probably to keep secret documents or a treasure safe," Carl shouted enthusiastically. And it was as if her brother had a secret gift, because, when they finally managed to break open the suitcase, secret documents were precisely what they found. But it weren't just any secret documents. Lindsay carefully took them out and quickly went over them. Her eyes grew wider with each second. One report was from 1945 and detailed all submarines of the Allied Navy on marked paper. If the enemy had gotten hold of this information, then the entire Second World War would have ended differently. Lindsay had to take this fantastic find with her while they continued their journey. And then, "Guys, come take a look at this." Carl's voice echoed through the bunker. He was about 20 meters further down in the following room. Lindsay and Flint rushed over and saw Carl standing near a cupboard. It was still so perfectly intact that it looked like it could have been used yesterday. Clothes were still neatly folded, bed sheets were piled, and weapon holsters were neatly stored. The stuff they found became increasingly incredible. The trio stared at the cupboard in amazement. This was yet another thing that blew their mind. This bunker was incredible. You can fill an entire museum with all this stuff. Carl eventually broke the silence. Lindsay looked up abruptly as an idea began to form in her head. The trio discussed their next move. They had been down here for hours and clearly needed help with all of this. What was the next step? While walking back to the tunnel, they discussed their options when Lindsay suddenly remembered their new neighbor, who owned a construction company. Once outside, Lindsay contacted him and asked for help. The man was intrigued by their story and was ready to assist. He called over a few workers and got to work on the excavation. The group was unaware that their most significant discovery was now in the making. In the following days, the excavation took place, and slowly but surely, more and more of the bunker came into view. Carl came to assist as frequently as possible, and one day, just moments after he arrived, the trio was startled by a loud and sudden bang. They hurried over to the end of the garden to find out what happened, and their eyes grew wide. There was a whole observation tower. They quickly instructed the workers to clear it as fast as possible, and once there was a way to enter, they went in. Lindsay, Flint, and Carl were amazed by what they found. All the equipment was still there, perfectly preserved, and seemed brand new. The room's lack of light and oxygen had kept every object in the best possible way. Giant binoculars, documents, and even anti-aircraft guns were present. After the discovery of the tower and its contents, everything moved into high gear. The couple decided to turn the bunker into a museum, and much needed to be done. The viewing dome would become their primary attraction. It proudly overlooked the surrounding dunes. As it did at the time, Lindsay said. Everything seemed to work out great and as planned. But they weren't aware of the tragic future awaiting them. Eventually, the whole bunker was excavated and ready for visitors, except one thing was still missing: an entrance. After long deliberation, they decided to give up their home and make the entrance at the hatch through which Flint originally entered. That way, the visitors would get the whole experience. After weeks of hard work and much anticipation, the day finally came, and Lindsay welcomed the first visitors to the museum. At first, Lindsay and her family lovingly ran the museum in their spare time. But eventually, after it got some traction, it became their full-time job. They spent much time and money on it and even left their new house, but it was all worth it. The museum was the best thing that ever happened to them. But then, one day, when Lindsay was opening the museum, she noticed a lot of stuff was missing. Lindsay became really worried when she saw that many things were missing from the museum. She called Carl and Flint, urging them to search for the missing items, but they couldn't find them anywhere. The sinking feeling in their stomachs grew heavier. Deep down, they realized what had happened but didn't want to say it out loud. That would make it real. Eventually, Lindsay sighed and broke the silence. "We've been robbed." Devastated by the theft, Lindsay, Flint, and Carl temporarily closed the museum to investigate. They made a list of everything that was missing. A mix of historical documents, vintage bottles, and war memorabilia. With a detailed list in hand, they contacted the police to report the robbery. While they waited, a mixture of sadness and determination hung in the air. They had to find a way to catch this person and get the stuff back. The police couldn't arrive quick enough, and when they finally did, Lindsay explained the situation, concern drenching her voice. Her worries only increased as she realized the museum didn't have insurance for this situation. The officers assured her they would do anything within their power to find the culprit. They asked the trio if they had any idea of who might have done this or if they had any other lead. Lindsay, Flint, and Carl were quiet, thinking hard. Who could have stolen these things? They had no surveillance cameras and no way to track the thief. "We never thought we'd need cameras in a museum like this," Lindsay said, her voice tinged with regret. They were open and honest, wanting to share their incredible findings with the world. They never anticipated that someone would betray their trust and steal a part of history. Then Lindsay broke the silence with a sudden gasp. "We might not have cameras, but we know who was here yesterday," she said, a flicker of hope in her voice. She just remembered they kept a record of every visitor that came to the museum in the visitor's log. It may be less useful than a camera feed, but it would at least narrow down the number of suspects, right? The police asked for the list of visitors from the museum and said they would call Lindsay, Flint, and Carl if they found anything. When the officers left, the room fell silent again. They were all thinking the same thing. They weren't just going to sit and wait for the police to call them with updates. The trio had to do something, but what could they do that the police couldn't? After thinking about it for a while, the trio concluded that the logical thing to do was go through the visitor's log. They sat down together, each page bringing back memories of the faces they had seen. Each name was a potential clue in uncovering the mystery of the stolen artifacts. They tried hard to remember if there was anything unusual about any of their visitors. And then Carl gasped. "Why didn't I realize it sooner?" he whispered. He captured Lindsay's and Flint's attention as he continued speaking. "I just remembered. A group of visitors were unusually interested in a couple of items, some of which are now missing." His voice trembled with excitement. Lindsay and Flint looked at each other. This was their first clue. "Maybe we can retrace your steps?" Flint suggested. The others nodded in agreement. Lindsay and Flint followed Carl as he showed them the route he had taken the group during the tour. They searched for overlooked clues, eventually leading them to the area where most of the missing items were displayed. There had to be something, right? Then Carl let out an excited gasp as he noticed a vague footprint on the floor. "Come here," he told the others as he followed the prints. Excited and full of anticipation, the trio carefully followed the prints, but they suddenly seemed to vanish. Puzzled, Lindsay, Flint, and Carl scanned the area, searching for any sign of where the person might have gone. Suddenly, Lindsay noticed a slight gap in the wall that seemed out of place. After some investigation, they found a well-hidden secret door. After some time, they managed to open it and were surprised to see where it led. "It's a secret entrance," Flint whispered in surprise. The door led them right outside the bunker, and once they set foot outside, Carl noticed a piece of paper on the ground. "Did the thief drop this?" His eyes grew wide as he spoke. It was a detailed map of the bunker's layout, increasing their worries even more. The fact that the thief knew the bunker well made it more likely that he would strike again. Lindsay, Flint, and Carl quickly called the police to tell them about the secret door and the map they found. Before handing over the map, they made a copy for themselves, ensuring they had a reference. They wanted to figure out how someone knew so much about the bunker and used it to steal the precious items. But the map also made them worried the thief might have never left and was hiding somewhere inside. The trio spent the remainder of the day scouring the bunker. Eventually, they were confident the bunker was empty, but their worries increased about the possibility of the thief returning. Lindsay looked at her husband as she went over the options. They couldn't afford to hang cameras yet, so what could they do? They needed to find a way to protect the museum and its contents and do it fast. Lindsay, Flint, and Carl brainstormed for a long time before they finally came up with something. They set up some hidden traps, which were cleverly designed to let them know if anyone entered the bunker that night. After they were satisfied with the locations of the traps, the trio returned home. Their minds were filled with a mix of anxiety and hope, not knowing what they would find the next day. Carl was at Lindsay and Flint early the following morning, anxious to check the traps. The trio went into the museum and was surprised and worried to find several of them triggered. They walked toward the hidden entrance and noticed there was no sign of entry. They looked at each other with a puzzled expression. So there were other entrances? Where did he come from this time? How could they catch the thief? All these thoughts caused Lindsay to panic. "Maybe we should call the police again," she suggested. Her eyes darted around the room, half expecting the thief to appear. Flint and Carl shook their heads as they reassured her. They felt confident they could handle this independently, pointing out that the police hadn't been much help. This was their problem, and their knowledge of the bunker would give them the edge. Or so they thought. Lindsay looked from her husband to her brother, feeling reassured and thinking they were right. This was their problem to solve. Like the day before, they followed the trail left behind by the thief, this time in the form of the traps, and discovered a hidden room. Once again, it showed this wasn't a random burglar. This thief had inside knowledge of the bunker. The question was, how did he get that knowledge? Lindsay, Flint, and Carl thought about it and soon realized that keeping the museum closed only worked to their disadvantage. So, they decided to reopen, hoping to prevent the thief from suspecting they were onto him. The museum was reopened, and the trio acted as if everything was okay, not letting anything show to let the thief know they were onto him. Meanwhile, their minds worked overtime to devise a plan to catch the thief. When the trio was closing the museum for the day, they discussed their plans, and one stood above all. Even though it was a big gamble, they all looked determined and confident this was their best option. They were hoping to catch the thief red-handed tonight by staying in the museum overnight. Equipped with flashlights and walkie-talkies, they positioned themselves strategically throughout the bunker. Their hearts pounded in their chests as the hours ticked by. It were long, tiring hours, and Lindsay caught herself almost falling asleep multiple times. But the tiredness quickly left her body when the silence of the museum was broken by soft and stealthy sounds. Her heart raced as she whispered through the walkie-talkie, "Someone is coming." Peering through the darkness, she saw a shadowy figure approach and take some of the items. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Lindsay watched the thief and felt real anger coming up. She tried to control her breathing, knowing she had to stay calm to catch him. There was no sign of Flint or Carl, so she had to act alone. Slowly, Lindsay moved closer, trying to be as quiet as possible. But by accident, she stepped on a loose floorboard. It creaked loudly under her weight. She held her breath, hoping the thief hadn't heard it. The loud creak alerted the thief, who quickly turned and spotted Lindsay. A chase began, with Lindsay close behind the thief as they raced through the dark tunnels of the bunker. The sounds attracted Flint and Clark, who quickly joined the pursuit. Eventually, they forced the thief into the observation tower, where he was cornered. Lindsay, Flint, and Clark shone their lights on the culprit and were surprised by what they saw. Tension filled the air in the observation tower. Drops of sweat reflected off the thief's forehead as the light beams hit his face. "Don't we know you?" Flint said, and Lindsay and Carl realized they also recognized the man. The thief turned out to be a former museum employee who worked for them during the excavation of the bunker. The trio couldn't believe someone they had trusted was behind the thefts. "Why would you do this, Adam?" Lindsay asked, the disappointment clearly hearable in her voice. Adam, as the former employee was called, sat down and held his head in his hands. Silent sobs could be heard shortly after. His voice trembled as he confessed to the crime and told him he regretted everything. Adam explained that his financial struggle had pushed him to act so recklessly. The whole situation gave the trio mixed feelings. Lindsay, Flint, and Carl looked at each other, all seeming to think the same. They decided to resolve the matter without involving the police. They agreed not to press charges for all stolen items to be returned. The trio felt sad about the situation and understood that Adam was in a tough spot. They wanted to give him a chance to fix what he did wrong and start making better choices in his life. Adam looked up at them, tears visible in his eyes. "You would do that for me?" "Even now," he said in disbelief. Adam swore to return every item, inviting Flint along so they were sure he wouldn't fool them. After the items were recovered, the trio decided to invest in the museum's security to prevent future thefts. They installed high-tech surveillance cameras and implemented a more stringent visitor check-in process. Another change Lindsay, Flint, and Clark made was also connected to the theft. Adam was one of the best workers during the excavation, and it hurt the trio he fell down so hard. They empathized with him and offered him a job as a tour guide, where he could use his extensive knowledge of the bunker. His insights and stories added a unique touch to the tours, making the experience more engaging for the visitors. Adam would play a vital part in the grand reopening the trio had organized. The event would celebrate the museum's triumph and proudly showcase the recovered items and their new security measures. The event included guided tours, special presentations, and a brief talk about the importance of preserving history. It was an opportunity for the whole community to see the bunker's rich history and the efforts made to protect it. The grand reopening was a huge success, drawing a large crowd from the community. People were impressed by the museum's resilience and the new security features, and the support was overwhelming them. Many people expressed their appreciation for the museum's role in preserving local history. The event strengthened the museum's bond with the community, leading to increased visitor numbers and local support. But it didn't end there for the trio. In recognition of their efforts to preserve historical artifacts and educate the public, Lindsay, Flint, and Carl received an award from the local government. The award ceremony was a proud moment for the trio, highlighting their dedication to historic preservation. Their journey from discovering the bunker to turning it into a thriving museum had been incredibly challenging but also rewarding, and the community's acknowledgement made it all the more worthwhile.